Hello and welcome again to the Writer Review. This is Eric Carruth Writer, and this week we're going to be taking a look back at the 2015 science fiction fantasy horror film titled Victor Frankenstein. Now, Victor Frankenstein runs for an hour and 50 minutes long. It is directed by Paul McGuigan. It is produced and written by Max Landis. And of course, it is based off of the novel Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, even though it's got a different take on the story of Frankenstein, which I will get to. Okay, the score was done by Craig Armstrong, the cinematography by Fabian Wagner, and the editing was done by Andrew Hulme. And the stars of the movie are James McAvoy, Daniel Radcliffe, Jessica Brown Findlay, Andrew Scott, Charles Dance, Freddie Fox, Mark Gatiss, Callum Turner, Daniel Mays, and Spencer Wilding and Guillaume Delauney. They played the part of the Frankenstein monster, who actually goes by the alias Prometheus. Now, what did I think of this movie? Well, the opening statements to Victor Frankenstein is, "You know the story." And indeed, we all know from the pages of Mary Shelley's classic horror novel from 1818 to the numerous adaptations that have graced the silver screens, including the iconic original 1931 James Whale directed movie which starred the legendary King of Horrors, Mr. Boris Karloff. And we all know all about the story of Victor Frankenstein and how he managed to resurrect the dead through science, technology, and to create his own man-made monster, which of course then goes on a collision course. And we all know basically what happens in the story. But here we have another take from the classic story that's really an added addition towards the other previous adaptations. Director Paul McGuigan collaborated with scriptwriter Max Landis to give us an original take of the movie, seen once through the eyes of Dr. Frankenstein's humble assistant, Igor Straussman, played by Daniel Radcliffe. So we first meet Igor as a nameless, hunchback circus clown who had to encounter a lot of physical abuse and verbal abuse from the audience and from his fellow colleagues just for the sake of entertainment. When not pleasing the crowd, Igor has a special gift, as he also serves as the circus's physician to the other acts. So when an incident involving a trapeze artist goes awry, Igor is then eventually introduced to Dr. Victor Frankenstein, played by James McAvoy. Well, he's not actually a licensed doctor in this movie, but just a medical student who is, of course, working on some scientific research in hopes that he can find a way to bring the dead back to life, which is much to the chagrin of religious fanatics who believe that the three stages of living is you're born, you live, and you die. But Victor Frankenstein, of course, is like, death doesn't have to be eternal, and that he could probably find ways that he could bring the dead back to life again. So, feeling that his gifts are being wasted, Frankenstein emancipates Igor from this uncompromising lifestyle to come work for him. So their escape really truly wasn't easy, because a strong man, a knife thrower, and several performers were on their tail, which of course leads to one of the circus performers dead. So, but still, Frankenstein leads Igor to his estate, and the castle that he stays in is a posh and resourceful science laboratory. So, Dr. Frankenstein removes a cyst on his back, which caused him to hunchback, and replacing a back brace concealer on him, Dr. Frankenstein adopts him with the name of Igor Straussman. So it seems that Frankenstein and Igor are now roommates, and they are now involved in taking part in recreational drugs, who's been missing in action for a while. So, with a hired assistant, Frankenstein can now propose his latest creation that would truly make him famous. So, set in the murky and dreary 19th century London, the movie takes in the effort of going for a new approach to the lore of Frankenstein by narrating a story seen through the eyes of Igor for a change, which could somehow make the title of the movie Dr. Frankenstein or Victor Frankenstein misleading, since this is seen through the eyes of Igor. Maybe the title of the movie should have been Igor, since Igor seems to be more of the central character and Frankenstein is more or less the secondary character. However, it still doesn't seem to stand up to the other adaptations based on Mary Shelley's novel. It looks like it's teetering towards an origin tale, but never goes to deeper scrutiny as to how Victor Frankenstein got the notion of bringing the deceased back to life. There is a few snippets of Victor's childhood involving his father, Baron Frankenstein's, played by Charles Dance's appearance, but it still offers very, very little in terms of insight. I wish we could have seen more. I mean, I think maybe that's one of the big issues I have with this movie is that it does truly seem to lack in terms of character development. Thrown in the thick of things is Inspector Turpin, played by Andrew Scott, who's called into the scene to investigate on stolen animal parts missing from the London Zoo and the London Veterinary College, and the murder at the scene of the circus. So Turpin suspects Victor and Igor are up to something as his investigation leads towards their path. Turpin, of course, tries to challenge Victor's progressive points of view, with Turpin having a more religious ways of thinking. Yes, it still is the epic battle between science versus religion, and Turpin is, of course, completely against the iconoclastic beliefs seen through Victor Frankenstein. So there is going to be, of course, that epic clash between religion versus science, because, as you all know, Inspector Turpin is a devout Christian who does not seem to understand or doesn't seem to want to understand what Victor Frankenstein is up to, and that he'll do anything he can in his powers to stop Victor Frankenstein and Igor from from creating life. The whole science versus religion conflict is handled in a subtle but to the point, along with the contrasting wardrobes that the two rivals wear. As you know, Victor seems to be somewhat flashy and spontaneous, and always seems somewhat enthusiastic in whatever project he's up to, while Turpin, he's like this real straight laced kind of guy who is, just gung ho about his work. Yes, he may come across as being somewhat of the villain in the story, but he's not like the villain in the sense that he's necessarily evil. He is just doing his job. He just does not approve of Victor and Igor creating life because it's just, in some ways, in his world, heathenistic. Hedonistic. And that it's definitely much to his chagrin. So, for what it is, Turpin will stop at nothing to put an end to the madness of Dr. Frankenstein and his humble assistant Igor. And you could tell the clothes that they're wearing is contrary to one another. Victor is wearing usually flashy, colorful clothing, while Turpin's choice of clothing is mundane and in gray. In some ways, it might come across cliche that, all mad scientists seem to come across as wearing flashy, eccentric clothing, while the conservative minded police inspector seems to just constantly, surreptitiously wear boring, mundane clothes. I know it kind of feels like a cliche, but, that's just how it goes in the story. So as we get to know Victor and Igor, their relationship is stronger, and at some points it kind of borders on towards, a possible homosexual approach these two have. And at first I was thinking, oh no, not another retelling of a story with with a political message, or this whole misconception to believe that Victor Frankenstein and Igor Straussman are closeted homosexuals. We don't need to have another gay themed movie. And it doesn't mean that I'm homophobic in any way, but it's just that can't we just have a decent, solid sci fi horror fantasy based on a classic novel without having to implement a political message or anything that has to do with some political correctness, or to make two iconic characters into homosexuals. I mean, they did that with Beauty and the Beast. Why do they need to have to constantly rub it in our face? Okay, fine. Fine. Homosexuality is fine. I mean, it's great to see two people in love with each other regardless of one's gender. But it doesn't necessarily have to be rubbed in our faces just because the left-wing Hollywood people want to set out a political statement. Can't we just have fun for once without the political messages put into their movies? But at least I'm glad it kind of took that turn out of the question, because it gets put to rest once Igor develops an infatuation with the trapeze artist he who he fixed at the beginning of the movie. Her name is Lorelei, played by Jessica Brown Findlay. And like Igor, she left the circus in bad terms and has lived a life of freedom. Lorelei eventually catches on to Victor and Igor's creation, and it's this scene plus the unveiling of their creation that make up for the rather mundane dialogue throughout most of the film. Sure, we may see the sci fi genre come alive here, but it's only very sporadic when more could have been added on to hold our interest. Of course, there's also that crossroads that Igor also takes, as to he's often questioning whether it's a good thing or a bad thing to remain loyal to Victor Frankenstein, or to question if this is a good idea to bring the dead back to life. as you all know, his previous scientific experiment to create some kind of a hybrid between a human being and a monkey that went haywire. And so then, you know, even though the movie is not emphasizing on the Frankenstein monster that's called Prometheus, the creation of Prometheus is only seen very, very briefly. So, for if you're a big die-hard fan of the horror genre and you wanted to see more of the Frankenstein monster Prometheus, well, you're going to be very disappointed because he's only on for like a brief minute and then eventually he ends up getting destroyed. I mean, he gets destroyed by the people who created him. And yeah, okay, there is that political statement of moral ethics that does come into play, and it actually is pretty tiresome. So if you were looking for a horror adventure story, well, you'll also be quite disappointed because the only horror elements that come are very, very briefly. In fact, if you really want to know, it's not the monster that actually comes across as being the one that's mad, but it's the scientist behind the monster that's the mad one. And that's basically what the story is about. So if you were expecting to see the monster terrorizing a city, well, you'll be disappointed because he's only on for a brief period of time and then he gets destroyed in the end. And then Frankenstein ends up saying that the greatest creation he's ever made was Igor. And then it ends, of course, with Igor and Lorelei, living their life in peace. And Frankenstein decides to just move forward. And that's kind of like how the movie ends. So if you were expecting to see one with a grandeur conclusion, you'll probably end up being very disappointed. Sometimes I have this kind of funny feeling that a sequel might be in the works. But if it does, will it continue with this kind of dramatic tale of moral ethics, or will it eventually just zap our way towards all the action and all the secret weapons and all the ways? Or will we have a monster movie, a real standard monster movie, one of Victor Frankenstein's creations, where he breaks through the walls of the castle and wreaks havoc on the civilians and causing fear and destruction? And then it's up to Victor Frankenstein to put a stop to his creation. Are we going to see if there ever is a conclusion? Will the emphasis be more on the monster and less on the creator? Only time will tell. But from the feeling of this movie, I believe there might be a sequel somewhere lurking within the horizons. And if there is a sequel lurking in the horizons, are we going to be up with open arms about it, or are we going to poo-poo the whole idea? There's a lot of questions that need to be answered. Because guaranteed, in this movie, there are a lot of questions that did remain unanswered. And maybe I might be looking through a blind eye, but I would like to be more further informed in the near future ahead. So, what did I think performance-wise? Well, I guess Daniel Radcliffe does a commendable job to make us forget about Harry Potter, and he succeeds in making a morally inclined character, Igor, as he clings on to his new life by staying loyal to his master while also questioning if playing God is a good thing or a bad thing. James McAvoy is clearly the star here, and he plays Frankenstein with dimensions ranging from a delusional lunatic to a much more lighter, funnier side with his interactions with Igor. There is definitely some great chemistry between James McAvoy and Daniel Radcliffe. If only they had more competent direction of where they were going with the story, that would have been all the more better. So, while it is a mildly enthralling movie to watch and the special effects are definitely quite eye catching, with some light humor and some good action to keep one intrigued, it's a good watch definitely for a rainy afternoon. Just don't expect any drastic impact compared to the other interpretations from the other adaptations from the classic Mary Shelley novel. So, with all that said and done, if I was to give a scale out of 10, I would definitely give Victor Frankenstein a 7. So I guess this ends my writer review. Thank you all for listening in. If you wish to subscribe to my channel, please feel free to do so. If you wish to leave a comment, go right ahead. Just remember, be kind, be courteous, and don't be rude. And I will be back again with another movie review. So until next time, this is Eric, your writer, saying keep watching those movies, and I'll see you around. Goodbye.